people can start losing weight just by making better decisions.
Motivation is driven from the inside out.
Use flexibility as a tool. Rely on structure when it's helpful.
This is where we discuss the possibilities.
Hey guys, welcome to the Diet Doc Life Mastery Podcast. I'm Joe Klemczewski, founder of the company, here with Dr. Kori Propst, our Wellness Director and Vice President. And today we're going to talk about avoiding negative emotions or not avoiding negative emotions. But today we are in our category of motivational mastery. So who better to discuss that than Dr. Kori? So Kori, are we supposed to avoid negative emotions or not avoid them? I wasn't quite clear exactly on the topic.
Yeah, well, we had a little bit of a discussion beforehand, and I would say that it is better, more effective as a human being to not avoid negative emotions. And here's really why. If we look at it from the perspective of what occurs when we do in the context of, let's say, goal pursuit, okay? Mm-hmm. A few different things can happen. Most of us want to be comfortable, right? So when we perceive that something isn't comfortable, that we're maybe feeling anxious or we're feeling distraught in some way, or distressed or stressed, or chaotic or unfocused or unclear, or that we're feeling threatened in some way, I think it's almost become automatic, and we've become conditioned to move towards a sense of safety, a sense of clarity, a sense of integration. I need to feel better. But
isn't that a normal part of evolutionary psychology? You feel some kind of threat, or maybe you could discuss different types of negative emotions, but what's happening in our psyche that makes us have that response?
No, you're correct in that. I mean, we evolved to move away from not being safe, from environmental threats, from things that feel like we could be hurt by them. We evolved to survive. So it really is a protective mechanism to move away from that negative emotion. But in this day and age, the things that we're feeling threatened by, like being worried about what this person might say about us, or getting up on stage and because we're going to give a talk and fearing that we're going to get some negative critiques or something, or whatever it is like that. Our survival is not at stake.
So what is when we do have those negative emotions, mm-hmm. and we'll stick with that primary threat base, what should we do, or how do we even recognize that?
Yeah, so there are a few different ways that I teach my clients and that I've practiced myself to begin perceiving the negative emotion in a different way. It all starts with perception. But I think at a ground level, understanding that emotion is what we are labeling a sensation. Emotion is literally energy in our bodies. It's energy in motion within our bodies. And if we were to just let it be a sensation, for example, and this is still labeling, but it's less of a judgment. So anxiety, for example, as a sensation, it could be, I can feel tightness in my chest, or I can feel that I'm sweating, or I can feel the temperature of my body rising. Each one of those things alone isn't bad. It's not negative. It is. It's a sensation. It's something that's occurring energetically within my body. But once I start to tell a story about it, and I start labeling it and judging it in some way and say, okay, this is bad. I shouldn't be feeling this way. Like, I need to change this. Then we're amping up the intensity solely from how we're putting a valence on it, and we're creating an entirely different threatening experience around it. So that there's that. But if we can understand, number one, that it's a sensation, and then number two, to be able to have a different way of labeling it. And I like to do this. There's the recognition of the sensations. Okay, this is here. Instead of saying, I'm anxious, and now I'm that close to it, I am essentially the stress. I'm essentially the anxiety, and it is residing within me. Like every cell of my body is feeling anxiety now. I do what's called a bit of distancing. And so I'll say, okay, this is an experience of anxiety instead of I am anxious. And you notice that when I did that, like I automatically took a breath. And so that's number one. We're working from two places. We're working from a physiological place, breathing in order to move us into a space where our brains and our minds can actually function more effectively. But then from a mindset and intellectual perspective, taking that non-judgmental approach towards the sensations of emotion.
So let me throw out a couple scenarios that people might find themselves in. Let's say I'm frustrated, anxious because it's been a couple weeks, and even though I'm working really hard, I'm not seeing the progress I want, maybe in weight loss, or it's the end of the month and I was supposed to hit a sales target at work and that didn't happen.
Yes.
Or my spouse is doing something that's making me angry or frustrated. So all of those different scenarios, from personal to relational to occupational, I mean, we have different stresses coming at us from different directions. So are you saying that there's a way to deal with each of them? It's a process we have to discover?
Yeah, absolutely. And the process is going to be a little bit different for each person. But, you know, and I mentioned this in a previous podcast, it starts with recognition. How do we think about emotion just on a general level? And then what is our pattern of behavior in terms of dealing with it or coping with it? And I think we need to recognize that there is a sequence that occurs. You know, when we react a certain way or we engage in some sort of defensive coping mechanism, let's take the person who thinks that they're not losing weight fast enough, okay? That feels threatening because of their perception, the thought, the story that this should be happening a lot faster. What's wrong with me that this isn't happening faster? My coach is, whatever the story they're telling, my coach is terrible. I need a new coach. My metabolism is damaged. We have to get in touch with the story that we're writing and creating first, what our thoughts are around it that are going to create that experience of threat, and then really drill down and ask, wait a second, like, is this reality? Because literally our reality of something is virtual based on our perception. And then to be able to move into, okay, what's the truth here? And if I let go of the judgment of the process, is there any stress there? Is there really a threat? But I think also on a foundational level, and we've talked a lot about this, is a lot of the threats that we experience can be related to 3 different needs that we have as humans. And one of them is safety, which is like a sense of autonomy, having choices in our lives. So if we sense in some way that there aren't any choices, we're being backed into a corner, it has to be this way, there's no out, okay, we're going to feel threatened in some way. And that's going to push us to react do something that seems to go against our goal and that we've said is important to us. It's a defensive coping mechanism to get us to this place where we feel comfortable again and like that need is being met. Another way to put it in the literature, you'll hear it called, we engage in compensatory behaviors. So we're compensating for a threatened need. Okay, so the first one is autonomy. The second need is competence. And that's the felt sense of effectiveness. So in that situation where you may feel like this isn't moving fast enough, I'm working really hard and I'm not seeing the results that I want to, that person's sense of competence may feel threatened. There's something that they don't know. There's something that they're not getting. There's something that they don't understand. And so with that threat, they move in, it feels uncomfortable. And so again, they react. They want to feel better. They're going to compensate for that need feeling threatened. And they might do something that we may call self-sabotage. But it's an act of self-protection to feel better.
Can I interrupt you for just a second and say, I know there has to be some quality to these threats and how we perceive them. Our limbic system is saying, hey, something's not right here. Mm-hmm. When we go too far into a state of anxiety or even some other emotions I'd love to touch on, mm-hmm. Obviously that can lead to the compensatory behaviors and ill health, mental health. Mm-hmm. But what should we be doing with those emotions? What's the positive that we should be paying attention to, or is there one?
Well, I think there are numerous ones, and each person, like I said, is going to develop kind of their own ways of thinking about that energy, those emotions. What should we be doing with them? Number one would be to acknowledge them, to say, oh, okay, this is here. And, I say that and it sounds really simple, but it's a practice. It's simple, but it's not easy. So the first step would be to recognize that those sensations are there, but then not to immediately move into, oh, this is bad, I need to get away from it, but okay, I can be with this. Like, let's come back to reality here. Like, I'm actually safe. I'm not threatened. Acknowledge it and breathe. I'm going to always come back to the breathing part, because we can shift the intensity of an emotion into higher gear or lower gear just based on how we are helping ourselves by breathing or not breathing. So let's take stress as an example again. We can heighten stress by engaging in very shallow breathing. So you might stop yourself in the middle of the day today, Joe, and just check your breathing. And you're probably going to recognize that you're not taking full, deep breaths. And so that's another good thing to do, is to start checking yourself. Set up deliberate times throughout the day where you can ask, like, am I facilitating my best body and mind response right now? Am I breathing? And then taking a few big, deep diaphragmatic breaths.
So that's a great way of addressing kind of what I would call the brain stem response, or the sympathetic nervous system, to make your body physically bring down the that threat response.
Sure.
Would it be helpful moving to kind of the next developmental part of the brain, the limbic system, and saying, hey, this is my acute response, but I'm biased. I'm looking at my own scenario here. Would it be helpful to say, what if I was looking at somebody else? If my office mate or my friend were having this exact same encounter with stress, what would I tell them? So kind of taking yourself out of the process a little bit.
Yes, absolutely. And that relates to that distancing piece. So yeah, looking at it from the perspective of an outside observer. I actually wrote a blog on this. I think I called it something like utilizing your imaginary friends or something. And so to be able to say, how would Joe perceive this situation? How would Susie perceive this situation? Or actively, Joe, like you said, if, I work alone, so it would be, you know what, I'm gonna call Joe and kind of explain the situation and ask him, what his perspective would be on this. Because yes, it's highly valuable to be able to generate all the other alternatives. And doing that with actual people, then guess what happens? We're connecting. Now we're now we're capitalizing on another one of the basic psychological needs, which is the sense of relatedness. I'm not alone in this. I'm not the only one who has felt this before. Other people have gone through this. And there's a sense of common humanity. And where we go when we feel threatened, like intellectually, is I am all alone in this. No one would understand. And that's not reality. That's not true. That's a story. But by connecting with other people, generating alternatives, and coming to the understanding that I'm not isolated in this. Other people have experienced it before and they've gotten through it. And we're really, really helping ourselves that way and utilizing the power of the vagus nerve is what connects our brain stems to our spines, to our guts. And literally in our guts is where we feel so much of our emotion too. And it makes sense from a physiological perspective.
Right. And tell me if I'm wrong here, but would another step in that process of managing your emotions, not avoiding, but managing them, be something like this, which would take it to the next level of brain function, more in the cerebral cortex? But one of my kids recently had a decision to make, and it wasn't a big deal, but it was creating some stress. And so he made a list of pros and cons. So he took that trigger, that decision that he could not make, and said, hey, let's just start objectively take this out of the stress response, take it out of even the emotional response, and let's just be cognitive about it. Is that something you would recommend?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that getting it out of our heads, because for those of us who tend to be more cerebral, intellectual thinking types rather than the feeling sensitive emotional types, we can get into just ruminating and thinking about it over and over and over and over again and not necessarily really going anywhere with it. That's when we start to feel stuck, right? And rigid, and that can bleed into like a sense of chaos. But so yeah, absolutely. Writing it down. I have my clients do that all the time, and it, especially with decision making, we're so concerned about what could potentially happen. What would other people think if I made this decision? How will other people be impacted? What might the negative ramifications be? But the value of the strategy that you've just mentioned too, that we often forget to do, is what are the possible positive consequences of this? We're always weighing the negative, but we rarely look at the positive. And that can potentially shift our emotion too into a space of openness and curiosity. So that's highly valuable when we're in that space of anxiety and stress and feeling some level of internal pressure.
Mm. So before I let you go, I want to shift gears toward just one more emotion. This may take an entire different segment, but you brought up the word rumination, and I just read a study that said sadness, which I'm sure anxiety can lead there, but sadness in itself is kind of the gateway to even long-term depression. But this researcher said that the emotion sadness hangs around, lasts up to 240 times longer than any other emotion, because we do tend to ruminate on that sadness and just, I guess, sit in it. So what would you say about that versus anxiety?
I don't know if I have much to say about sadness versus anxiety, I would encourage people who are experiencing a sense of sadness to observe it within themselves rather than looking at it as I am sad. And probably, I would say, Joe, I haven't read the study. I'd like to read the study, that it can feel pervasive primarily because of the way that we're perceiving it. It's like when we're in it, we are looking for things within our environment that complement the sadness, that almost reinforce the sadness. And I know that that is what happens within depression, is individuals in a depression are going to look within their environments and within their relationships, and specifically, because that's what's front and center for them, specifically pull out the things within their lives that are depressing, that are sad, that reinforce the feeling that they're already experiencing. And so, I don't know that sadness is more difficult to get out of or to shift in some way than anxiety. I mean, I don't know that from a scientific perspective, but I don't want to say objectify it, but to have I think having a plan, I mean, you hear this all the time, but in order to have a plan, you have to understand yourself a bit better. And so to be reflecting upon, what is sadness to me? How do I know what sadness is for me? What do I experience? What goes on in my environment? What sorts of things happen that would typically shift me into a space of sadness? Do that for all your emotions. When my clients start with me in my Mental Edge program, that's one of the first questions I ask them, because they come to me with a lot of emotion and they're having trouble navigating it. I don't like to say manage, I like navigate, right? It's kind of like we're going to be a good steward of our emotions because they're a part of us. But that's one of my questions is, how do you know you're experiencing that emotion? What are the signs of it? On the outside, like if I were a fly on the wall, what would I see from you that would tell me, oh, okay, Susie's experiencing, a sense of being distraught? And then what occurs on the inside? Because it's that recognition piece first, and then we can develop a plan of action for when that occurs.
Well, this leads to a great topic I would love to explore in another segment, which is, as cliche as it sounds, other people aren't responsible for my happiness, or I'm responsible for my own happiness. There is a lot more to that, I think, than people realize. So what a great topic maybe to jump into next time, or in the future at least. But
yeah, that's a juicy one. That would be a fun one to get into.
All right, guys. Well, we're going to wrap it up there, and we will be back with other compartments or topics within our Life Mastery podcast. This was Motivational Mastery. We're going to talk about macro mastery, which is looking at your individual nutrition. Another segment on science or fiction, picking apart a little bit of cultural mythology or research, trying to decide which category it falls in, science or fiction. Of course, we're going to be also back into our coaching clinic, where we interview a nutrition and fitness consultant. And as always, we'll also help with your fitness entrepreneurship goals. So I'm Joe Klemczewski, founder of the Diet Doc, Dr. Kori Propst, health psychologist, helping us out here today. And we're going to call that a day.
All right. Thanks, guys. Please like, share, and we would love your comments and feedback. Have a great day.